Hi, this is Mike Maloney, and I'm here with David Morgan of themorganreport.com and Jeff Clark, the Senior Precious Metals Analyst of goldsilver.com. And we haven't gotten together before for a discussion. Recently, Jeff wrote a great article, and Dave sent us an email about it, so we decided we'd all get together on it. So how are you doing, David?
I'm doing good under the circumstances, Mike. Thanks. How are you?
Yeah. Pretty good. And Jeff, how are you doing there in Sacramento, California?
Oh, it's nice and sunny and warm, so all good.
So you wrote an article recently, potential looming catalyst for silver that no one sees coming. The theme of this was about potential for governments to start accumulating again. David, you're the one that actually sort of spurred this whole conversation between us. You read it and sent an email to Jeff and to Dan about it. So tell us about what your impressions were of the article.
Well, first of all, I love the title. So, great on your clickbait there, Jeff. But seriously, titles mean a lot. It was a great one, and it was very meaningful. And so, I read almost everything in the silver market, no matter, what the source. But there's, I have my discernment. Regardless, I thought it was a great article, and it really got me thinking because one of the themes I've been doing for about the last year was what if silver were treated like gold? And basically the crux of that issue is that silver was the monetary standard for a long time. I mean, the world's on a silver standard, not a gold standard. And China was the last to come off a silver standard. And the whole opium wars and everything else is a rather complicated story I won't go into. But going back to the crime of 1873 when silver was demonetized, I mean, the political debates of days gone by were all about the monetary issue. Most of the major debates through a lot of the United States' history was about money. So when Jeff said governments, it just like the light bulb went on. Wow, there's someone else out there in the silver space thinking how important it is. And then I did a video for an update that I do weekly. And I think at least half of the time that I allotted was all about your article. And I stated, one, how much I liked it, and two, the fact that the United States used to have a strategic stockpile of silver. They felt it was so important that it was sacrosanct. It was basically behind lock, key, and as a metaphor, and they needed to hold on to it no matter what. Well, that changed. Some of these more progressive types, I'll call it, I'm not trying to box anyone in politically. I like to be apolitical, but back on point. Silver sitting there collecting dust. What do? They started the Silver Liberty program, commonly known as Silver Eagles, in 1986, and started to just whittle down the stockpile. When they started it, the law said you could only use domestically mined silver, which meant basically the Silver Valley where I live, what comes out of Nevada, and a few other places in the continental United States. And that quickly was less than required to meet the demand on Silver Eagles. And so they changed the law and said they could source silver from anywhere. So I just thought that was the number one point. And will some governments come into the fore and use silver as a strategic holding, potentially as a energy source, a battery metal source, a monetary source, or any combination therein, especially factoring in what one of my, I call him a mentor really, would be Hugo Salinas Price, that's been at the forefront of putting silver back alongside the peso as a monetary unit in Mexico. So there's so many vectors that just went through my mind that I just had to write to you guys and say, hey, bravo, good for you, and thanks for kind of revivifying all the aspects that silver entails. It's not just an industrial metal.
So Jeff, what is your... the article is mostly about potential of government demand. Tell me about your take on this. There's some great graphs in here. The first graph was actually in my book when I released my book in 2008, showing the government inventories. But there's several graphs after that I found very interesting. If governments wanted to match prior levels, for instance, and so on.
Yeah, so how this all came about for me was I've been thinking about this for several years. It's been in the back of my mind. Would governments really buy silver again? Because they used to hold it, a lot of it. And then Incrementum's report came out in Gold We Trust. If you know that,
Yeah.
huge report that just came out a few weeks ago. I worked my way through it. It's very very big, and I got to a section on this very topic, and there was some conjecture: could governments actually enter the silver market again like they have in the past? And I thought, aha, David Morgan and I are not the only ones thinking about this possibility.
Right.
And the more I looked at it, the more I realized, I have to write this because there's a lot of history with governments and silver, either using it as currency. They don't hold it in any reserves or anything like that, but they've inventoried it, they've stockpiled it. Silver, as David has pointed out many times, has been used as currency more often than gold. So there's obviously a historical tie between governments and silver. So they really buy silver again. Because if they did, the amount of silver that would be available to them would not be sufficient to meet any kind of real monetary need. For example, if they just wanted to match what they were going to buy back in 1970, what they held back then, it would be more than 1 year's supply, mine supply. But that's not realistic. That's like asking all of us to live off our 1980 salary. You have to measure it according to today's values and
Ounces
on
per
that.
capita is what, yeah. The number of ounces per capita because the population doubled, right? Is that what you're talking
Right,
about?
the population's doubled, so just to get there, now you need twice as much silver if you want to match what they held before, and that's still not enough because back in I think the peak was 1980. I think you have the article in front of you, Mike, but
Yeah.
I think it was 0.26% of assets that silver of all financial assets that
Oh,
silver
you're talking about global financial assets. That's the one that I think is really fascinating because right now, silver is about 176th of what it was in 1980 as a percent of global financial assets. In other words, to reach the same amount, it would have to either go up 176 times in price, like right away, or the rest of the global financial assets would have to fall in value. So,
or they have to buy a lot of silver, just
yeah,
to match it. So that's the comparison I was making. Is like, look, back in 1980, and silver wasn't part of the monetary system then either. But back in 1980, that's how much silver represented of all the global financial assets in the world. So just to go back to that level, they'd have to buy something like 8.1 billion ounces, I believe it was, Mike. So it's a ridiculous,
8.318 billion. Yeah.
yeah, which is a ridiculous amount. That amount is obviously not available. And the point of all this is that governments would represent a new buyer to the silver market. We have a lot of industrial buyers, we have investors, we have jewelers, all kinds of buyers in the market. This would represent a brand new buyer to the
Right.
silver market. And if they entered to make any meaningful difference to their balance sheets, match their currency, whatever, they would need to buy a lot. And so the amounts would be, overwhelming. Now, I acknowledge
Right.
that odds of this are probably pretty low, but I don't discount it because if the monetary crisis gets as bad as you've outlined, Mike, and David's pointed out many times as well, if it really gets that bad and we have a transition away from the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world, that's going to cause some major monetary upheaval. And I think all options get on the table at that point, and silver would be an easy choice for governments to do. They've done it in the past. And
Yeah.
silver is a monetary metal already. They don't have to look elsewhere.
Well, when new buyers do come in and the prices start to rise, I think years ago, David, you wrote an article about some of the silver users in industry, some of the big silver users that use a lot of ounces, trying to front run price rises. For instance, I think you said if Apple wanted to buy enough silver to keep them in business, to keep being able to make iPhones and computers and everything else for the next 5 years or something like that, that it would be an immense quantity of silver. Do you remember that article?
I vaguely do, and I'd like to add on to that a bit. First of all, Samsung has a direct relationship with Avino Mines to buy all their silver. So some of
Huh.
these electronic companies, they're not going to worry about what the COMEX inventory is or what the smelters are producing. They've got a direct line because they could see what's coming, or they know how vital or essential it is to their business model. They have to have silver. There's no substitute. The other part that I outlined in my weekly perspective was that there's a gentleman, I won't name because he didn't give me permission, that has gone into all the South American countries, Mexico South, Chile, Colombia, Brazil, Peru, but primarily Peru, Chile, and Mexico, because and Argentina. I didn't want to leave out Argentina, a little silver, are very large silver producers. And he asked them the question that what would be the benefit to hold back some of your in-ground silver in refined form for essential services like electricity, because there's so much of a push toward green energy, and we all know that silver is a vital component in photovoltaics. So he was just asking some of the legislatures at the highest level if they might consider why silver, I'll call it strategic, not in a war effort, but strategic for energy production. You might want to rethink your silver position. And I
Right.
just threw that out because I'm aware of it. I've talked to him several times via Skype. And, I'm free market. I mean, if you want to throw that idea out there, why not? Because I think it's a valid idea. I mean, I could argue silver's going up because of the monetary demand, and that's the main horse I ride. But I could get off that horse and get on the industrial demand only horse and still make a case that silver is going to continue up because more and more demand all the time. And what if one of these countries, or let's say that there was a match to the Silver Users Association, which is in reference to the article that you're noting, where a country say, you know what, we can band together too. And we want to keep back 40% of the silver supply because we see in the next 5 years we're going to need that much electrical power due to clean energy. And we don't want to be, taxed by the, World Government Taxing Association if you're not producing clean energy or something along those lines. I just made that part up, but I'm just trying to give the idea that there could be forward-thinking countries that produce a lot of silver that might want to reconsider what they're selling it for. Paper dollars? Maybe that's not such a good idea.
Right. One of the things that worries me a little, I mean, the possibility of war is very low, but we're seeing like saber rattling and stuff from governments back and forth between the U.S., Russia, and China. We're at levels of potential danger that we haven't been at for years. And what happens to silver in war? The strategic stockpiles are extremely low, and you can't fight a war without it, right?
Right. I'll take that up and hand it over to Jeff. I mean, this is one of the things where I've been neglect in all of my analysis from day one. And believe me, it wasn't because I didn't think about it. But if you look at the two main silver studies and even the older ones that I'm familiar with, like Handy and Harmon and others, never, ever, ever do any of them speak to what the military demand for silver is. Yet we know that almost everything that they use that's battery powered uses silver batteries because of the efficiency and the ruggedness of that metric. So, when you look at any of the studies, CPM or the Silver Institute, and you see what the industrial demand is, they never break out what the military use is. And there's, as Charles Savoy used to say in some of his early articles, just one torpedo, I forget the amount of ounces, it was an astronomical amount of ounces in a cruise missile or a torpedo. So that's a use. And so, we believe the data that comes from those two studies? And the answer is I do. It's the best we have. How accurate it is, I don't know. I'm certain it's not 100% accurate. But there's a kind of an X factor there, Mike, that you're bringing to the fore, and thank you for doing so. That, things heat up around here, there might be a much bigger demand on silver just for military purposes that no one's really factoring in other than maybe us at this discussion currently.
Well, governments around the world, the first graph in Jeff's article is government silver inventories. So this is around the world, right, Jeff? This isn't just the U.S. government, right?
That's total global silver holdings. It's 48
right, and that,
something.
yeah. So I had this graph when I published my book, although the graph ended in, I think, 2007, because the book was published in 2008. But and it's been pretty much static since then at around 48 million ounces globally. And they used to have many, many times more than that. And it wasn't just because of the treasuries. There's a strategic supply that all governments have to have. If they get involved in war, they have to make sure that they've got constant access to silver. During World War II, we used silver for the calutrons in the wiring to refine uranium into plutonium when we were developing the atomic bomb. It's a strategic metal, and if governments wanted to prepare for it, they would start stockpiling ahead of time. And that would spur another government to, I don't want to go too far down this road. It's almost like a conspiracy theory road, but but it's not conspiracy theory. It's true.
It's true. And I think that the big issue is that if they do want to come into the market, they're a new buyer, as I was pointing out, but they would need a lot of metal because they don't have a lot of metal. It's only 48.6 million ounces that all governments around the world hold today. So
yeah,
that's 3 weeks of
350 million ounces, right?
That's 3 weeks of mine supply. It's a minuscule amount. It's almost a meaningless number. So again, I think the odds of this are low, and let's hope it doesn't happen because of war. But if it did happen, they would need a lot. They would take supply away from other sources. They, for geopolitical reasons, military reasons, like David's pointing out, they might want to keep production within their country and not distribute it. So it could get ugly and could get out of hand very easily. So again, I actually hope it doesn't happen, but if it did, it would have dramatic impacts on the price and on supply.
Okay. We're all silver guys. I tend to talk about gold a lot in a lot of my videos. And I want to just remind all of the viewers that when I talk about gold, I'm also talking about silver. And I keep on forgetting to do that. But I think all three of us agree that silver is like gold on steroids, right?
Certainly has been in the past, and especially, from my work and actually on the shoulders of giants, as the expression goes. I mean, Royus Jastram proved in Silver the Restless Metal, which is behind me in my bookcase, that if you're in an inflationary depression, the best place to be, bar none, is the silver market.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my personal holdings is the vast majority is silver. As far as the dollar value, I would think that my gold is probably only 20% of my holdings, or even less, because I just expect silver to explode, which brings me to the gold-silver ratio. Jeff, do you have any plans to trade the gold-silver ratio?